Welcome to this panel with a discussion on the topic of Islam in a modern Europe. We are discussing this question or this topic since many years in Europe, in all the societies of Europe, how Islam should look like, who fits to, say, European values and to the Western European democracies, and also what potentials for this kind of modernization of Islam are within Islam itself. And we are trying to get a bit clarity on this issue and sorting out, looking at possibilities, how this relation can develop. It's within the overall topic of the conference, religion and change. So here it's a question of change, on the one side of society, changing because of the strong presence nowadays of Muslim people in European societies, but also of other religions, so generally of enriched diversity of religions in Europe on the one side, but also question of change in the specific religion of Islam, which may be necessary to adapt to the specific context of European societies. For this discussion, I have here invited three people to contribute with their, I would say, wisdom and also their programmatic ideas, but also with their critical understandings to this question. And here on my right side, I welcome very much Mouhanad Khorchide, and next to him, Professor Jure Zovko, and theoretically online, Professor Susanne Schröter. I will introduce these three speakers now in one row and not always. So the idea is every one of these three people will give a presentation of around 20 minutes, and after that they will discuss with each other, and then you will also have the chance to contribute your questions or statements either here in the on-site in this lecture hall, but also online in using the chat function of this panel. So you can send your questions online on the chat function, and then it will be given to me, and I will pass it on to you. And before now this introductory or impulse short presentations come, I will want to introduce you to these three participants in this panel. And I welcome now also visibly colleague Professor Schröter. Hello, nice to see you. Actually, I just got a police contact because they wanted to protect you, but unfortunately now they had to go more or less home because you're not here. So it's an interesting form of co-presence without causing problems. Mouhanad Khorchide, born in Beirut, Lebanon, and grown up in Saudi Arabia and academically educated mainly in Austria, is today an Austrian teaching Islamic theology, especially the pedagogic of Islamic religion at the University of Münster in Germany. Since 2010, he is here at the University of Münster, professor at the Center for Religious Studies and director of the Center for Islamic Theology, and also principal investigator at the Cluster of Excellence on Religion and Politics. And I want to mention here that this Center of Islamic Theology will become in short time a faculty for Islamic theology, so adding a third faculty of theology to the Faculty of Protestant Theology and the Faculty of Catholic Theology. Mouhanad Khorchide is well known in Germany and I think also beyond, perhaps not in all societies of Europe, but even surely in the Islamic countries. Some of his books are bestsellers. He is inspiring the German public with his ideas of a modern Islam, which not only fits to Western democracies, but also supports it. In his well-written and much discussed book from 2012 with the title Islam ist Barmherzigkeit, Grundzüge einer modernen Religion, Islam is Mercy, Outline of a Modern Religion, he put forward what is the very core of the doctrines of Islam. This book was heavily criticized from part of the Muslim communities in Germany. In a similar direction goes his book 2015 with the title Gott glaubt an den Menschen, mit dem Islam zu einem neuen Humanismus. God has faith in the human being, with Islam to a new humanism. In his book from 2020 with the title Gottes falsche Anwälte, der Verrat am Islam, God's false advocates, the betrayal of Islam, he criticizes some realities of present-day Islam, which he sees as corrupted versions of the original intention of Islam. He shows how a religion of mercy more and more became an instrument of submission and oppression and criticizes these forms of a false Islam. His title of his presentation later will be Chances and Challenges of Establishing an European Islam. Thank you that you contribute and that you are here. Also here, at least visibly and also acoustically, is Professor Susanne Schröter. She is a German professor of ethnology at the University of Frankfurt. There she is also director of the Frankfurt Research Center on Global Islam, director of the Cornelia Goethe Center of Gender Research, and she is also then board member of the German Orient Institute. In Frankfurt, she is also, or was in Frankfurt, principal investigator in the important cluster of excellence on the formation of normative orders. Already last year, she joined the cancelled Congress of the European Academy of Religion as a keynote speaker, which she also could present only online, unfortunately. Susanne Schröter is in Germany and beyond well known with her critique of certain trends of political Islam on the basis of her excellent expertise and knowledge about the Islam in general. Her book from 2019 with the title Politischer Islam, Stresstest für Deutschland, so Political Islam test, a stress test for Germany, was and is widely read and discussed. Just recently, in 2021, came out a new well-written book of her with the title Allahs Karawane, eine Reise durch das islamische Multiversum, Allah's Caravan, a journey through the multiversum of Islam, in which she takes the reader to various cultures of the Islam in various countries, which are widely unknown in Europe. She understands this book as an invitation to discover the Islam in all its diversity and its many colors. Many of Susanne Schröter's books and publications are also a result of her research on gender. As ethnologist, she analyzes gender relations, for example, in Southeast Asia, like in her book from 2013, Gender and Islam in Southeast Asia, Negotiating Women's Rights, Islamic Piety and Sexual Orders. With a similar direction, she edited in 2013 a volume of articles on Geschlechtergerechtigkeit durch Demokratisierung, Transformationen und Restaurationen von Genderverhältnissen in der islamischen Welt. In English, my translation, Gender Justice through Democratization, Transformation and Restorations of Gender Relations in the World of the Islam. I thank you very much Professor Schröter, that you are joining us and contributing to our discussion.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now I have invited somebody who is a bit of an outsider to these discussions on, say, the Islam in modern Europe, but who has always in his life followed the development of Islam in Europe. It's Professor Jure Zovko. He was born in Široki Brig in Herzegovina, and he went to school in Mostar, say living on the Catholic side of the river, and had to go to the other side in the Muslim part to go there to primary school. He has experienced the living together of Christians and Muslims in his home in Bosnia-Herzegovina from his childhood on, in all its forms of harmonious coexistence, but also in the form of coexistence in heavy conflict. Nowadays is Jure Zovko a Croatian philosopher and full professor of philosophy of science and epistemology at the University of Zadar in Croatia, the nicest place of a university in the world, I know, directly at the Adria. Jure Zovko studied at the universities of Sarajevo and Freiburg in Germany, where he completed his PhD in 1989 with the dissertation Verstehen und Nichtverstehen zur Entstehung und Bedeutung der schlegischen hermeneutischen Kritik. Since 1990, he has conducted research at the Institute for Philosophy in Zagreb. From 1993 to 2000, he went into politics and was Deputy Minister for Science and Technology of the Republic of Croatia. He has then been Professor for Ontology at the Faculty of Philosophy of the University of Zadar, and changed recently the denomination of the professorship. He is a permanent member and since recently Vice President of the Institut International de Philosophie in Paris and member of the Académie Internationale de Philosophie des Sciences in Brussels. He is also a member of the Hegel Society, which I mentioned because it shows a bit the direction of his reflections on, say, Islam in modern Europe. From his many publications, I am the most impressed by the fact that he has done something which is not really an own writing, but that he translated most dialogues of Plato from Greek into Croatian. His books are on various philosophical problems, but also on hermeneutics, which relates him to the discourses in the theologies and in the religious studies. I'm cooperating with him in the area of philosophy of religion since more than 15 years, and we have yearly together a study course on philosophy of religion, which also has tackled the idea of pluralities in the area of religion in Dubrovnik, also a nice place. So now I introduce you the three contributors to this dialogue or trialogue. And now I would like to ask you, Mouhanad, to make your presentation.
I want to speak about chances and challenges of establishing an European Islam. It will soon be 20 years since the 9/11 attacks. After September 11th, interest in Islam increased sharply, both in society and politics, but also in academic discourse. In Germany, for example, the introduction and expansion of Islamic religious instruction in schools was the subject of intense debate. As of 2010, several centers for Islamic theology were established at German universities. Nevertheless, Since September 11th, Islam has been strongly associated with retrograde and violence. The current image from Afghanistan are currently evoking a lot in the collective memory of many people in Europe who are afraid of Islam. Therefore, the question that preoccupies many is, can Islam be interpreted in such a way that it belongs to the identity of Europe without causing conflicts or tensions? Many speak in this context of European Islam or Euro-Islam or a liberal Islam. In my lecture, I would like to address two aspects in order to be able to answer this question as differentiated as possible. Firstly, on a theological aspect, and secondly, on a social aspect. The theological aspect deals with the question of contemporary interpretation of Islam. The social aspect deals with the question of how Muslims, especially those who were born and raised here in Europe, identify themselves with Europe. The first part, the theological aspect. An Islam with a European character presupposes that it is understood and interpreted in such a way that it provides devout Muslims with a base of critical reflection on traditions that are difficult to reconcile with modern values such as human rights, pluralism, and democracy. Since Islam has no magisterium and no church, there is a wide range of religious interpretations of Islam. Hence, the image of Islam in Europe depends on the interpretations of Muslims themselves. In the following, I would like to go into key points on content-related aspects on the way to an Islam that harmonizes with the reality of life of people in Europe today. First, overcoming religious exclusivism. Insisting on the sole truth claim on one's own convictions leave hardly any room for other truth claims. The religiously based exclusivism insists that outside of one's own religion, no salutary knowledge of the transcendent reality or revelation can convey it. Other religions, therefore, have no salvation mediating function. However, exclusivism is not to be equated with making one's own claims to truth. The latter can, but need not be represented in an exclusivist manner. If I believe that my religion is a path to truth, it doesn't necessarily rule out other paths to truth. In this openness, I in no way relativize my own claim to truth. In religious exclusivism, there is a base for violence because it's a form of rejection of the other. If this rejection takes place in the name of God, it takes an absolute features with which violence in the name of the holy can be legitimized. Therefore, it's precisely the preoccupation with the peace potentials of religions and their strategies for coping with violence that is central. Second, interpretation of the Quran as historical critical hermeneutics. Both the Bible and the Quran address issues such as violence, war, patriarchal attitudes, etc. Nowadays, there is an increasing question of how to deal with such passages in the scriptures. If you read them ahistorically, you run the risk of letting them be used for political purposes. Even if the Quran is considered a divine message for Muslims, this in no way excludes the possibility of a historical contextualization of its statements. What is decisive is the understanding of the act of revelation as dialogical communication in and through history as an alternative to the idea of monological instruction by God. The Quran, understood as a medium and result of communication between the messenger and the community of Muhammad in the 7th century on the Arabian Peninsula, needs to be properly understood to take into account the historical situation of this communication. A literalistic reading of the Quran ignores the fact that the Quran was proclaimed discursively in the act of communication and can therefore only be understood discursively. A historical critical approach to the Quran diffuses the potential for violence in it because it's no longer read ahistorically as imperatives that have fallen from heaven, but rather as the product of historically grown disputes which for Muslims at the same time represent the involvement of God in their history. Third, love ethos as potential for peace. Like Christianity and Judaism, Islam has a religious ethos in the form of moral universalism. This doesn't mean a global ethos that is intended to replace religions, but a religion's ethos that includes all people regardless of their beliefs or world views. This ethos of love of the three monotheistic religions goes beyond the ethos of justice. It's about charity. Love doesn't exclude justice, but it goes beyond it. Fourth, separation of religious and political institutions. The principle of secularity seeks to protect both the state from religious claims to power and religions from political instrumentalization. It's therefore to be understood as the basis for the religious neutrality of the state. In a secular state, nobody is forced to believe. At the same time, the religious community is protected from state interference, and the state refrains from favoring a specific religious or even secular worldview. Fifth, Islam in the field of tension between basic democratic values, Modern plural societies require a high degree of participation from their citizens. Democratic states, in particular, are more dependent on their own political identity than despotic or authoritarian societies, which we meet in many Islamic countries. But what holds our European society together? Is there a set of values in Europe that also includes Muslims? Three central values of the French Revolution are indispensable for a peaceful and constructive coexistence: freedom, equality, and fraternity. The Catholic religious educator Joseph Freise interprets them for us today as connectedness, solidarity, and compassion. Even if these values are mostly understood as secular and religion-free values, each of us has to combine them with our own religious or non-religious tradition. Values must become a lived reality so that they do not remain empty slogans. Sixth, maturity and reflection as the basis of religious education. Modern religious education sees self in the service of the individual becoming subject and his or her self-determination. Today, religious education is about individual acquisition processes. The focus here is on the human being with his or her reality of life, his experiences, expectations, wishes, needs, etc., as the subject of the processes of religious education. In a modern Islamic education, it's not about the authoritarian teaching of principles of faith or final answers, but about enabling people to develop and practice their own religiosity. To do this, they have to reflect on the meaning of religious content so that they can take responsibility for their own religiousness. The subject must therefore contribute itself. If religious education is about a subjective concern of religion, a dialogical theology is required, which unfolds the God-human relationship not as a relationship of obedience, but as a dialogical relationship. Over the past years, I have developed an approach that I call theology of mercy. Mercy is a central Quranic category that appears prominently in the Quran. This theology is a theology of freedom that defines the relationship between God and man in terms of freedom. There is not enough time to go into details, but I find it important to critically question traditional approaches that describe God-human relationship in categories of obedience and submission. Second part, the social part. The Muslims born and raised here in Europe have high expectations of Europe. For them, Europe is their home. But if this homeland keeps conveying, you are a problem for us, or you are foreigners, or if these young Muslims repeatedly see themselves in an apologetic attitude, they have to constantly justify themselves and their religion, then the European identity fails here as an offer to these young Muslims. Many find refuge in a victim discourse, and it's precisely here that there is a great danger that these young people will begin to radicalize themselves. And political Islamists in particular are trying to establish a victim discourse among Muslims in Europe. The strategy they use is to see an enemy in the West, with which Muslims should by no means identify. The West remains the enemy of Islam. Hence, negative narratives about the West are being made into a general image. Racist incidents are used to make general statements about a racist West. And so we have recently seen that terms such as anti-Islamic racism or Islamophobia are used in an inflationary way, especially by agents of political Islam. I don't mean to say that there is no such thing as racism and no Islamophobia. I am criticizing the inflationary use and thus the instrumentalization of such terms by political Islam in order to construct an enemy image of the West. When the Documentation Center for Political Islam was founded in Austria in 2020 to conduct scientific research into political Islam, the accusation of Islamophobia was immediately raised, mainly by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. Unfortunately, some politicians and researchers fall on these intimidation attempts and begin to practice self-censorship. They avoid any criticism of political Islam in order to avoid being labeled as evil, as an Islamophobe. Last year, or 2019, My colleague Susanne Schröter wrote an excellent book on political Islam in which she goes into the background and strategies. Unfortunately, she was attacked immediately and stigmatized by members of political Islam as an Islamophobe and Islam hater. I see that this political Islam debate urgently needs a courageous academic discourse. It's therefore very important to us at the Cluster of Excellent Religion and Politics at the University of Münster to approach such phenomena and strategies scientifically. We have set up a network for Islam and politics at the cluster in order to network all projects on this topic. We are happy to invite interested parties to join the network as the field is still young. In the last part of my lecture, I would like to briefly address the possibilities that we have in Europe to establish an European Islam. Mosques are an important place for conveying religion. The imams played an important role because the image of Islam for many Muslims depends on the religious content communicated by the mosque communities. Since Islam has no magisterium and no church, there is a wide range of religious interpretations of Islam which are represented differently in the mosque communities. The integrative role of mosques, therefore, depends on their religious offerings. The results of empirical studies show that mosque communities are becoming increasingly unattractive for young Muslims. In his 2016 study of Muslims of Turkish origin in Germany, the sociologist Detlef Pollack from the University of Münster came to the conclusion that members of the second and third generation visit mosques less often than the first generation, 23 versus 32% weekly or more often, and also much less often say that they pray, 35 versus 55%. At the same time, the Salafist scene is becoming increasingly attractive, especially among young Muslims. It's not enough to distance oneself from Salafism and extremism and to condemn them. What the young people urgently need are counter-offers to fundamentalism that fit in which the reality of these young people's lives. The point is not to give them the choice of either being European or Muslim, but rather to offer them the basis for a multidimensional identity, to be a European and Muslim at the same time. In the public debate in Europe, the need for imams to preach in European languages has been and continues to be discussed. The sermon of Muslim imams in German or English or other languages, European languages, will undoubtedly ensure more transparency in the work of the imams. However, the language is not the only problem, because the content that is conveyed to the people in the mosque communities is just as important. In this context, the question arises as to the extent to which Islam, which is taught in mosques, harmonize with the life of Muslims here and today. This question is central because most Muslims do not read the Quran themselves or deal with Islamic literature, but rather rely on the religious knowledge that is imparted to them. And since imams are regarded as role models for many Muslims, they shape the image of Islam for many Muslims. In addition, imams serve as contact persons for many, not only in purely religious, but also in some social issues. Imams act as multipliers and social mediators at the same time. In some European countries, most of the imams come from abroad, like from Turkey or North Africa. In other countries, most of them have no real theological academic training. That means that the religious discourses around Islam in Europe are either determined by foreigners or by, as a rule, strongly conservative lay people. Many imams do not even speak the language of the country in which they live. They hardly know the reality of people's lives. They are hardly confronted with European values such as freedom, equality, and other democratic values in a theological discourse. At the same time, in their Friday ceremonies, they reach millions of Muslims in Europe week after week and convey to them an Islam as they understand it, mostly, as I said, an Islam that is far from European reality. The establishment of an European Islam that helps Muslims to identify themselves as Europeans and to identify with European values without them seeing a contradiction between these values and their religious presupposes, that we create institutions in Europe that convey this European influenced Islam to future imams. It's not enough that imams are trained in Europe. What matters is the question, what understanding of Islam are they trained according to? To what extent are European values conveyed in this training? Therefore, we need academic institutions in Europe to train imams. The last point concerns Islamic religious education in public schools. Some European countries, such as Austria and Germany, have introduced such teaching. We are experiencing here in Germany how important it is for young Muslims of school age to have a reflective approach to their faith. Therefore, the establishment of such teaching in European public schools would be very important. Where such lessons are lacking, the young Muslims usually look for answers to their questions on the internet. On the internet, you will come across a range of interpretations of Islam, including radicalist and extremist ones. Finally, I have an important remark. European countries are secular. That is, the state doesn't determine which Islam Muslims should practice. But that doesn't mean that Europe is idly and passively watching and waiting for an European Islam to emerge on its own. We need appropriate concepts, spaces, institutions, friction surfaces that include the Muslims. And by Muslims, I mean independent, both from abroad as well as from Islamism. Allow me to give you a sentence along the way. It's not enough for us to reject and condemn terror and violence in the name of Islam. It's not enough for us to complain about the lack of an established European Islam. The solution doesn't lie alone in criticizing deficits. The real solution lies in creating reasonable alternatives. As I said, this includes common concepts and visions of Imam training as well as discourses on establishing an European Islam. The establishment of discourses, however, requires appropriate institutions. I am therefore very grateful that we have academic centers for Islamic theology here in Germany, but also in other European countries such as Austria, at which Islam is reflected anew in the context of the current challenges in Europe. Thank you for here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mouhanad, for this survey. I would say more general, but then also with very concrete considerations on your idea of bringing forward an Islam in Europe, which is an European Islam. So thank you very much. And I would like now to give the word to Professor Susanne Schröter.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me. Yeah, is it? Yeah. Um, yeah, after that excellent talk of Mouhanad Khorchide, it is not easy to figure out the points which are really new. And what I would like to do first is, even if I'm talking about Islam in modern Europe, is to go back into the past, because the images of the past, certain particular certain events in the past, they play a role among Muslims and non-Muslims, vice versa. The relationships between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world um, can be traced back to the 8th century, and there are certain points which um, are focused on, particular by certain actors of Muslim organizations, but also among politicians of right-wing parties in Europe. And one of them, of course, is the conquest of Jerusalem, and then the wordings of crusade coming from Muslims on the one hand, and also from politicians in the West. So that idea that there is a conflict at the beginning of the relationship between Islam and the West, or Islam and Christianity. The second is the Muslim rule in Spain between the 8th and the 15th century, and this is much more ambivalent. Because there is a story telling the tolerance in a particular time of Al-Andalus, which could be a model for us today. On the other hand, not the whole phase of Al-Andalus was peaceful, and that not the whole phase was tolerant. And the second one, which I think has the greatest impact today, is the Ottoman Empire, which started in the 14th century and ended in the early 20th century. And when European colonialism started to conquer the Islamic world. So the Ottoman Empire of the one side, the colonial Islamic empire on the one side, and the Christian Western colonialism on the other hand, that are very, very strong images even today, and they were used by several actors in the discourse. So the history is characterized on the one hand by diversity and also by regional characteristics. Since we have a speaker here from the Balkans, I would like to mention this particularly because the greatest impact of the Ottoman Empire was definitely in the Balkans, where until today we have a strong Muslim European community, and the idea that European Islam could be something like that in the Balkans, that is prominent in the discourse. I expect that we will hear something about Islam in the Balkans. What I learned is that it had been at least partially syncretistic Islam, which had been established by Sufi orders such as the Bektashis. But I am sure that we will learn much more from the third speaker today. So we had European areas who lived under Islamic rule for centuries, particularly in the south, in Italy, in Spain, in the Balkans, and we had areas which for whose population Islam was certainly strange was the religion of people who were far away from Europe. This changed in the 19th and 20th century, particularly with geostrategic politics, European colonialism, and it then came to new instrumentalizations of Muslims by European countries. For example, I will just give an example from Germany. The archaeologist Max of Oppenheim, who was doing excavations in Syria, was at an intelligence agency in Constantinople during World War I, and where he attempted to stage an uprising by Muslims against England. So Germany used the Ottomans as an ally against England, and during that time, the Foreign Office published a magazine, the German Foreign Office, with the title El Jihad, and advertised a holy war against the British. That is part of the history which is really strange, but sheds a new light on a kind of relationship which is widely unknown in the debate in Europe and in Germany particularly. Unknown is also a relationship between Muslims from the Muslim Brotherhood and Nazi Germany, particularly the alliance with Amin al-Husseini, the notorious Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who shared his anti-Semitic sentiments with the Nazi Germans. And unknown as well is that Muslims fought in the ranks of the German army during World War II. The history of the 20th century was then ruled, on the one hand, in colonialism, which was particularly true for England and France, in the Cold War, and in labor migration. And the Cold War played a role in migrations of members of the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly from Syria and from Egypt, from the countries which were allies to the Soviet Union, and Muslim brothers who were persecuted by these states who were allied with the Soviet Union, and were offered asylum in Europe. And that started even in the 50s, 60s, and then the 70s, and that this is the basis for Muslim brother engagement in Europe, which is indeed a problem for today. And then the story goes on with migration, with European recruitment of workers from Islamic countries, and with recruitment agreements, for example, with Morocco, with Tunisia and Turkey. So we have in the modern history in the 20th century, we have from the 16th on, we have mass migration of Muslims to Germany, and that since then we have a stable Muslim minority which is rapidly growing, particularly in the cities, and these people are fighting for political and social participation. However, it is a question what is meant by participation. The question of how religious freedom is anchored in the constitution plays a role. Debates whether Muslim teachers, female teachers, are allowed to wear a headscarf, and whether offensive depictions of the Prophet Muhammad are protected by the freedom of expression, for example. So basically, it is the debate is on norms and values, And many politicians define themselves somehow rooted in Christianity, somehow rooted in enlightenment, but it is not so clear when it comes to know what this means, particularly if you go back to the question of the headscarf, for example, which is an ongoing debate since more than 20 years right now. Muslims in Europe are a heterogeneous group, are a group according to surveys which contain in the majority of secular people, people who can be pious or not, but who don't make an issue of their belief, and who advocate the secular model of the state, and are well integrated here. But we have also a group which is growing, and I would call them fundamentalists, people who, as Mouhanad Khorchide taught us, use Islam as something which is the most important thing in their identity, something which distinguishes themselves from the rest of the population, be it Christian, be it secular, and or be it also Muslims who don't share their particular mode of belief. So we have fundamentalists, and we have them among the third generations of Muslims, among young people who don't go to the mosque, but who are very much concerned about Muslimic values and Muslimic norms, and about halal and haram, what is forbidden, what is allowed. And so they create a lot of problems, particularly in schools. They try to prevent that evolution theory is taught by the teacher, and they don't go to they prevent girls from taking swimming classes and things like that. This is all known, but this is rooted in that fundamentalist ideology. And now it comes to the point, who are the guys behind that ideology? If we have young people, kids who are born in Europe, who are grown up in Europe, then we have to question how it comes that they are much stricter in their religious belief than their parents and grandparents. And according to my research, it is particularly the agents of the huge Islamic organizations, and in Europe it is particularly the organizations of the Muslim Brotherhood, who came after World War II, as I mentioned, and on the other hand we have Muslims from Turkey who are recently, since several years, instrumentalized by President Erdogan. Erdogan himself, he came from the ranks of the Milli-Görüş movement, an Islamist movement, which tried to re-Islamize the laicist Republic of Turkey, but is now a transnational movement which is acting in several European states as well. So we have that Turkish influence, and the Turkish president particularly deals with certain images going back to the past. For example, with the idea that Islamic rulers should conquer the world. And then he refers to the European history when that happened within the Osmanic Ottoman period. So this is an image which creates at least distance in young Turkish Muslims, distance to the European societies. They feel they are Muslims, they are true Muslims, and God wants that they spread Islam everywhere and that they make even Europe an Islamic part of the world. And but you can trace these ideas back to certain actors, particularly the Turkish president, particular actors in Turkey. So the influence of Turkish politicians via Islamic organizations are counter-integrative in European countries, and at the end they cause distance between Muslims and non-Muslims. And the point to mention when it comes to Islamic politics is that these organizations, particularly the Milli-Görüş or also the DİTİB, which is the biggest organization, they are all partners of the state, they are all partners of the churches when it comes, for example, to religious education in state schools. The other great bloc is the Muslim Brotherhood. Mouhanad Khorchide mentioned them already. Muslim brothers are much more hidden, I would say. Whenever you name somebody a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, you can expect that he goes on trial with you, because nobody says openly, yes, I'm a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and all the Muslim brothers say there is no Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a particular problem with that. But they exercise great influence as well. They have huge organizations, European organizations, with national centers. And a third group, which plays a role not in all countries, but in Germany, it does, Iranian organizations who are linked particularly to the Iranian regime, to the Mullah regime. In Germany, we have the center of that European organization in Hamburg, particularly. Yeah. Political Islam. Why political Islam? These fundamentalists aim to exercise political influence, and that and they are quite successful in doing that. Their main enemy are the liberal Muslims or the progressive Muslims, as I would name them, such as Mouhanad Khorchide and others, who are challenging their interpretation of Islam. And this is the reason why liberal Muslims in Europe are threatened, not only threatened by accusations of being Islamophobic, but their attempts to, their hermeneutics, their approaches to Islam is criticized as non-Islamic. And some Muslims are even threatened by their lives, such as the founder of the liberal mosque in Berlin, Seyran Atesh. Yeah, we are facing a kind of culture war in the Islamic world. On the one hand, we have a re-fundamentalization of Islam in certain parts of the Islamic world. On the other hand, we have liberal movements, new theologies, and this kind of culture war is also in Europe right now. And so we are not the center of that culture war, but we are facing the results of that. And so the question is now, how can we act, we as a civil society, we as academics, and also the politicians? What is our position in that clash? Because it is of meaning for our societies in Europe. Muslims are a growing minority, and we should care about what kind of Islam will be established in the future in Europe. Will it be a liberal form, a secular form of Islam, which is well integrated into our societies, into our continent, or will it be something which is totally hostile to our values, to the rights of the individual, to the rights of women and girls, to the rights of LGBT, and to tolerance, to the freedom of press, etc., etc. So Islam in modern Europe is, and this is the end of my talk, is not homogeneous. It is conflictive, it is controversial, and we all play our part in the growing of that Islam. And we can decide if we try, with whom we try to work together. If we work with the big organizations, with the DITIB, the Milli Muslim Brotherhood, because we identify them as a so-called Islamic Church, as the biggest players in the field, and which many politicians do, as I know, or do we try to create models of participation with all the Muslims who live with us as colleagues and friends and do not belong to that fundamentalist big organizations. It's a bit, I would say, it's a bit more complicated if you see people who are organized. It's very easy to get them into a forum, to find people who are in leading positions, etc. And it's more complicated if you have a bunch of individuals and say, yes, these are the people who should participate in political, in the field of politics, who should participate when it comes particularly to religious education or to other things of importance. So that seems to me the main problem. On the one hand, we have big organizations, but majority of them is fundamentalist, is anti-integrative. And on the other hand, you have individuals, small groups who try to live a modern Islam which is compatible to Europe and to the European values. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Schröter, for this, I would say, description, characteristics, and evaluation of the present situation of Islam in Europe, especially in Germany. First, by looking back with a narrative of major steps of the relation, say, of Europe, be it the West or the Christian Europe, with Islam and vice versa. And then was giving a kind of, I would say, sociological perspective on main actors and trends and within the Islam of the present time, especially hinting to some problematic tendencies, problematic groups, fundamentalistic groups, and asking this question to us, with whom do you cooperate when we are in the end dealing with Islam in Europe? Now, thank you very much for this contribution. We will go later in discussion. Now I have asked especially Professor Zovko, especially not to inform about the history of the Islam in Bosnia, in the Balkan, but rather to be here as a secular philosopher with a sensitivity of living together with Muslims on the Balkan, and reflecting from his position of from political philosophy on this. So it's a voice from a bit outside from these internal discourses, and the voice from philosophy or political philosophy on this issue. So please, Jure, you have the word.
Thanks, Peter, for inviting me to this conference. The topic of my presentation is liberal Islam possible in liberal European society? Political scientist Basim Tibi from University of Göttingen has argued for Euro-Islam based on 5 normative foundations: pluralism, tolerance, secularity, that is the separation of politics and religion, democratic civil society, and individual human rights. The main problem of such abstract claim is that they lack moral substantiality in the Hegelian sense, namely the concrete religious form of life in the concrete life world and democratic society. This requires renewed education and upbringing of the followers of Islamic religion in the spirit of the liberal society. According to Habermas and John Rawls, Francis Fukuyama, Hegel is considered as father of European modern liberal society because he took freedom of spirit as fundament of our society. In this sense, I would say I belong to this religion of liberal society, religion of bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civic society. That is what I miss in all Islamic countries. And my question is, do Islamic people who live in this liberal country belong to this cultural tradition? I think not, and that's my problem. And in this sense, I'm more radical than Susanne Schröter. In the elements of philosophy of right, Hegel defines the person from the standpoint of freedom. I quote Hegel, and I'm vice president of International Hegel Society. It is part of education, of thinking, of consciousness, of the individual, the Einzelnen, in the form of universality, that I am apprehended as universal person in which respect all are identical. Human being counts as such because he is human being, not because because he is Jew, Catholic, Muslim, Protestant, German, Italian. That's the main position of liberal society. And that's what I miss in all Islamic countries, that we don't have bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civic society. With this definition of the position of human beings in the state, Hegel rejects every possible form of denial of freedom and creates the institutional framework for concrete realization of liberal society, which he calls system of institutional morality, System der Sittlichkeit. Freedom of the individual requires also respect for the rights of others and cooperation with social institutions in order to be able to concretize its essence. Due to his concept of freedom, Hegel has become primarily a philosopher of modernity, because he integrated elements of Christian doctrines of freedom into the secular system of state institution. John Rawls characterized Hegel's political position as important exemplar in the history of moral and political philosophy of liberalism of freedom. The concept of person and society fit together. Each requires the others and neither stands alone. This is very important for the concept of liberal society. Education integration into the existing liberal system of the life world, which Hegel calls second nature, is primary text of humanities, artes liberales. In the elements of theory of rights, it is explicitly stated that the task of education, Bildung, is to establish a liberal life world, so to show the path by which human being may be born again, insofar as his first nature is transformed into the second spiritual nature of culture, so that intellectual, that geistige, becomes habit of person. It became part of our morality, of our tolerance, being human. Of course, our second nature is constituted by mutual recognition and acceptance of ethical life form, which we assimilated in the process of our educational cultural development. The institutional form in which we feel ourselves free and secure are the result of social and cultural mediation and mutual recognition, Anerkennung among human beings. The question of developing confidence in the states and state institutions is one of the fundamental issues of civic education. And elements of the theory of right, Hegel provides an illustrative example of relationship between the citizens and the states and the significant role of education. I quote Hegel, to the question of father, as to the best way to raise his son ethically, Socrates gave the following answer: by becoming citizens of state with the good laws. Hegel critically analyzed the negation of freedom and tolerance that manifested in fanatism in the Islamic tradition and compared it with the Jacobin terror during the French Revolution in the name of justice and inequality. La religion et la terror were the principle in the case of the Islamic fanatism, as with Robespierre, la liberté et la terreur. As we have the case that Islamic religion is compared with terror of Jacobinian, that the people are killed in the name of justice, in this case, killed in the name of religion. Abstraction, according to Hegel, negates the diversity of life forms and cultures, threaten liberalism in the core. In Islam, believers are designated in the Quran as a slave of merciful God, Ibadur Rahman. That's Furqan, Surah Al-Furqan 25:63. The true servant of the merciful one are those who walk on the earth gently. This definition of man in the Quran is diametrically opposed to Hegel's liberal definition of person, according to which everyone is free as human being, regardless of his national and religious declaration. Bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civic society, is society of free person. Islam as a religion is religion of slaves. That's the main problem. They have to liberate themselves to bürgerliche Gesellschaft in the Hegelian sense of word. Of course, according to this negation of freedom in the history, Hegel criticized Islam, that is form of abstraction. I will step over this quotation of Hegel. From the perspective of liberal form of life, the designation of man in Quran is a tremendous step backward. Let us think on Hegel's famous characterization of history as progress in the consciousness of freedom. In the Oriental and Asian monarchy, only the ruler were free. Among the Greeks and Romans, the minority of citizens were free. The majority were slaves. After the appearance of the Christian religion, all became free. There are no more slaves. Apostle Paul says, in Christ, all are free, Galatians 3:28. In Christianity, a principle of the universality of freedom is established. It is no longer possible to go back. Hegel's achievement were that he applied the most important element of the Christian doctrine of liberty to the secular system of state institutional, and thereby contributed significantly to the establishment of liberal society. Islam, in the form of Islamism, is in the form of political Islam, negates the liberal way of life and seeks to reshape liberal society, culture, secular state, and politics according to Islamic norm. In the process, religion is strongly politicized in the Islamic way of life. It is characterized as true and correct, and the lifestyle of Muslims is regulated on the basis of categories of what is permitted, halal, and what is forbidden, haram. In the spirit of recognition of other, the liberal way of life presupposes possibility to integrate diversity of cultures in the world's view. In the same time, freedom, responsibility, the right to the criticism, autonomy, and the right to self-determination remain as the sine qua non of liberal society and liberal way of life. The basis of my consideration is whether our liberal way of life and Western civilization is threatened by political Islam. With Professor Susanne Schröter, I agree that political Islam is danger for our plural and liberal society and education, but the consequences that follow from political Islam is absolutely necessary. Prominent expert for Islam, Majid Kaduri, in his book, War and Peace in the Law of Islam, Johns Hopkins Press 55 and 155, argues that in the history of Islam, we have had only one option of Islam so far, namely political Islam. Islam in the European countries face a new challenge, namely adoption to the norms of democratic society, freedom, equality, tolerance, and recognition of others. Muslims in Germany have wonderful opportunity to practice their religion in a liberal secular society, but they reject this, pleading for the society with Shariatic legislation. If half of Muslims living in Germany are of opinion that good Muslims are obliged to convert infidels to Islam, or that following the commandment of Islam is more important than democracy, this can be characterized as substantial threat of the Western way of life and democratic society. I agree with Mohammed Khorchide that the followers of Islam should regard human dignity as Kant formulated it and as is written in German Constitution, and set it up in the highest, as the highest value. In this context, claims to absolute truth which should apply to followers of one's own religion are abandoned. Similarly, I agree with Khorchide that Islam can be considered as interdenominational religion, according to which every good person can be considered as a believer, it is Muslim, because Abraham and Jesus were characterized in Quran as Muslims. The main problem with this conception of Islam from Professor Khorchide is that it's abstract, does not exist as a way of a form of life. This is the reason that Hegel criticized Kant's idea of freedom and cosmopolitanism is abstract and convincingly proved that we need a state where we can realize such ideas, where man can exist as person and be active in society as person. Idea of person must not be bound to any religion, but is independent of religious affiliation. We could be all Muslims in the sense which interpreted Professor Khorchide. Apostates from Islam, Murtad, should be recognized as equal citizens, as persons in the Hegelian sense. Changing of religion should and could be self-evident, as well as the right to choose the atheistic way of life or to be agnostic. This is basic determination of the liberal society, and Islam should also adopt to it. About 67% of most Muslims living in Germany as German citizens consider Islam to be the only true religion. This monopoly on the truth is threatening for our civilization. I know this feeling because I belong to this tradition which described Susanne Schröter, the Balkanic form of Ottoman Islam. My centers are half sides from the Turkish, became Catholic, and the other were always the Christian. They lived under Ottoman occupation for 5 centuries. They would have to accept this view that Islam is only true religion. They would have to reject conversion to Islam and the privilege that come with it, in the shadow of the view that Islam is only true religion. They developed for themselves a comfort conviction that Catholic religion is beautiful religion. As the basis of liberal Islam, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, must be taken, and not the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam, 1990, which remains subservient to Sharia. I quote Article 24, all the rights and freedom stipulated in this declaration are subject to the Islamic Sharia. Only when Islam accepts the basic value of European modernity can Muslim migrants become citizens of Western civilization. Human rights should be universal and asserted as absolute above national or religious affiliation. Hannah Arendt has accordingly formulated the validity of human rights, that there are such a thing as right to have rights. We have known only since millions of people have been who have lost these rights, and because of the new global organization of the world are unable to regain it. If we have the rights to change religion, think we on this right, in which countries it exists. So, that determination, right to have right, does not remain merely abstract. It must be institutionalized. It is should be embodied into the state institution, into our bürgerliche Gesellschaft. Islamic communities in the Western European countries must not become parallel institutions, parallelny polis, in which Shariatic norms are applied. They must be full recognized. There must fall recognized civil law and secular society. But I agree that we have now in Germany and European countries parallelny polis as we had during the communist society. The word parallelny polis is from Václav Havel and Jan Patočka. To be against the mainstream of society, you build parallel polis instead to have bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civil society. The Muslims in Germany live in so-called parallelny polis, parallel society with his Islamic normativity and tradition. Thank you for your attention.
So we thank you very much, Jure, for these considerations, which were based on, say, some basic ideas of political philosophy, mainly relating to the Hegelian tradition, where it is important that individual rights and freedom is not only something which is, say, something which I can claim, but is also happens within an organization of the state which guarantees this freedom, for example, by the law and by strong institutions. So on this basis, you developed your, say, reflections on the situation, present situation of Islam in Europe with some critical remarks, perhaps a bit backwards with Hegel. I was tempted to say that some Hegel reader also took not very liberal consequences out of Hegel's philosophy. I mean the reader of Hegel, because as you know from Tito area, communist, the left-wing interpretation of Hegel had also a very strong authoritarian
Okay,
direction.
I think we live now in a clash of civilization, and I belong to this liberal society, and I hope, as Hegelian, that we will this clash of civilization, we people from liberal society.
I don't want to go into this direction now. I first would like that you, Mouhanad, perhaps comment perhaps to Jure's reflection, because you also mentioned the topic of freedom in your presentation and put it very much forward as a very important element in your understanding of Islam. And now you had some critique that, say, in many forms, perhaps not everywhere in Islam, but in many forms, which Professor Schröter especially characterizes as, say, political Islam, this element of freedom may not be present. So perhaps you can say something to this.
I agree with this critique. The political Islam is against a theology of freedom, because for the political Islam is ideology of power. But I think the biggest challenge we have in Germany, especially in Germany, maybe in Europe also, but in Germany, we have centers for Islamic theology. And I know that there is a lot of other colleagues working on modern theology or modern interpretations of Islam. But in Germany, the representatives of Islam who the state talks with, who are responsible for who become a teacher for religious education or not, are not the academic, and not we academics, not the theologians. They are the representatives of Islam, and they belong, not all, but most of them belong to the political Islam, or from Turkey or from Muslim Brotherhood. And the problem is the German states always, and the politicians, they told us, we are secular, so we don't tell Muslims how to understand religion or how to understand Islam. So we need your Muslim church. Where is your church? Where is your organizations? They think in the categories of dealing with Christianity. So Christianity, there is the churches, and if you are Mitglied, member of the church, so the church represents you, and they are dealing with Islam the same way they are dealing with Christianity. And I think this is the fundamental problem in Germany and maybe in Europe, because the Islam is not organized. He don't know. It doesn't have organization or institution like a church. It's individual religion. So it's with whom should the state speaks with if he want to organize religious education at public schools. So the German state goes to the organizations which speaks for Muslims, and they are organized. Sie haben sich organisiert.
Yeah, they organize themselves.
They organize themselves. They organize themselves because of political reasons, not because of theological reasons, not because it's the Islam in its self-understanding have an organization like the church in Christianity. And I think the solution is to deal with Islam in Islam self-understanding, to say, okay, we don't look for a huge organization like DTIP or something else. We have to make maybe expert roundtables or something like that. They will speak with us about Islam and about Muslims, or we treat them as representatives of Muslims or something like that. Otherwise, I don't see a big chance for freedom theology in Germany, at least, because not we theologians have this in our hand. If I say something that 2012 or 2013, because of this book, Islam is Mercy, the organizations of Muslims here, they wrote 75 papers to tell this is not Islam, this is, and they wanted from the university so to bring somebody else from them to teach Islam here at the university. So this is what we are dealing with, and this is the big challenge. And I think we have to look after solutions.
But if I compare your book and the book of Susanne Schröter, you have Platonic world of ideas of Islam. And Susanne Schröter showed a really world in which we live. Of course, your world of ideas could give us some norm, some way how to orient our life. But Susanne Schröter remarked us again, look, we live in the society where 66% wants to convert us to Islam. And if I convert to Islam, my son had a girlfriend 5 years in London, Muslim. Of course, they divorced. It's not possible because only my son belonged to bürgerliche Gesellschaft. That's the problem. And his girl belongs to Parallelny Polis in London.
So you were shocked? You were shocked because of the girlfriend of your son?
No, okay, the girlfriend they have now contact, but the parents of her girlfriends was against my son. And they said, okay, but the question was, would you convert to Islam? No. Why should he convert to Islam? My son belongs, he has only one religion, it's humanism. Humanism. It's religion.
Professor Schröter, I like to ask you, you describe very clear the situation that the Muslim brothers have this underground influence. I mean, I know from Facebook that they take you, some of them take you to court because of whatever utterances of you. But, and so it's, do the Muslim in Germany especially have the wrong examples of a meaningful Muslim life? In your newest book, which I like to read on the Allah's Caravan, you went to other contexts, and as I myself has conducted a research project on Muslims and Christians in Indonesia, I'm a bit familiar with Indonesian Muslims, and I like the relaxed way most of the Muslims there living all the regulations and have a bit of not so strict difference between what is allowed and what is forbidden. So different operational, and you described also in African contexts and so on, groups of communities, Muslim communities, which are also living in a different way, is Muslim life. So are there the wrong examples that also we in our discourses concentrate very much, say, on this I would say Saudi Arabian type of Sunnitic Islam?
Yeah, I mean there are two layers. One is theology. I would say the hegemonic theology is not liberal. I think Mouhanad agreed that most of the theologians in the world, the Islamic theologies, are more or less fundamentalist, and the liberals are a small group. Could you understand me?
It was not perfect. There was a bit of audio problems.
Maybe
can we solve that?
Now it's good.
It's better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So first is theology. The other layer is pragmatism. And even in areas where you have fundamentalist theology, you find Muslims living something different. And this is particularly in Asia. But I hear an echo. Do you hear the echo as well?
Yeah, it's not perfect, the acoustic. Can we improve that? You don't know.
Can the technique
it's better,
improve something? Yeah,
no,
so
no, they
otherwise
cannot. They cannot help you. It's perhaps that's perhaps internet connection.
Oh, really? Okay. So pragmatism can help a bit, but in Europe, I fear the only thing that helps us is that politics will really clearly define values for society, values and norms for society, and then decide with the work together. The other problem, which is unsolved, is parallel society. What you call perilous parallel polis, as I understood you right?
Parallel
society, segregated communities, how you name it. It is these growing, very fast growing communities which do not only develop Shariatic, but clearly position their youngsters against society, and that is really a danger for Europe. And so my advice would be to really defend the norms of civil society, of universal human rights, of bürgerliche Gesellschaft, and that is not very new. How to stand against authoritarian actors, against authoritarian ideas, and unfortunately, parts of the leftist parties have formed an alliance with the Islamists. In France, this is called Islamo-Gauche, but we have it in other countries of Europe as well. These are the people who immediately blame critics of political Islam as Islamophobic, and who prevent up to today that we have serious research at the universities on political Islam. We have hundreds of professorships on racism, on Muslims and Muslim discriminations, but we don't have any professorship, any denomination, particularly on political Islam. So it's under-researched, and that is a sign of tabooization of a particular topic. And this prevents a reasonable discourse on Islam in all kinds of practice and all kinds of theology.
Mouhanad, I'd like to ask you in follow-up of this statement, is there not enough trust into, say, the law system, the democratic institutions and so on in Germany of the young, especially young Muslims who are going in a more political direction?
I think it's not a question of trust, it's a question of identity. Do they identify themselves with the state, or is the state the opposite of them? And the second and third generation, they have Erwartungen, expectations. High expectations, because they are here born. This is their Heimat, their home here. And if we always questioning, do Islam belong to Germany or to Europe? We are asking, do these people, the youth here born, here socialized, do you belong to Europe or to Germany? So this is no more their home. They identify themselves with it, because this home is making always a question: do you belong to us? I think it's always also important. I don't want to go in apologetic discourse, but this is also a reality. Why, when I'm talking with some of my students, they always saying, yeah, but we should do this and that and understand Islam at this and that modern way, only because they want us to understand the Islam at this way. So they have this problem to identify themselves with the state, to say not they want from us. This is our society, and our society is pluralism, is modern, is democratic, so we want to understand Islam in a way to harmonize with this society. And I think it's a matter of identity, and it's a matter of the whole society, not only the matter of Islam. It's not a matter of theology, it's a matter of accepting each other as a part of one society.
I think we have to change the image of Islam in the form which present Professor Khorchide, because it could be adapted to the modern society. We have the case in Croatia, for example. We don't have problem with the Muslims. In Bosnia and Herzegovina is problem that some parties have sympathy with Erdogan. Just last weekend had the wedding of president of Islamic Party. Daughters was married, and the godfather was Erdogan, of course. And the 2 billion Muslims celebrated on this wedding, and 19 fractions who are fighting against Zadar in Libya. All were agree during this wedding because Erdogan was godfather of wedding. And that's a problem. Which form of should we have political Islam, or Islam is normal religion as each other? And I have unbelievable lot Muslim friends, great friends, and I celebrate with them. I drink with them for Ramadan, for Bayram, and all that, because it's my form of celebration. And I have recognition for them as person. And Hans-Peter knows my friends from Sarajevo. We had postdoctoral studies on European culture, how to adopt Islam to European culture. And it's fast normal in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia.
But I like to add a bit of question on this issue, and also because Professor Schröter has some expectation perhaps to look on the Balkan. My experience was that, say in Bosnia especially, that I was told that, say, in the old times before, say, communism, there was a very diverse and plural Islam world in Bosnia, and also a very liberal Islam. And then communism, with the forcing into secularism of the people, came, and then, but also then with the wars and after wars in the 90s, then a lot of influence from, say, the Near East and Saudi Arabia came with a lot of money. And I remember that when I 1 year was there, I saw so many headscarves. Interestingly, 3 years later, I saw not anymore anyone. But when I came back to Germany, I saw much more headscarves. But I would like to ask this question, because it is discussed that the Balkanian Islam could be a kind of positive image or positive example for European Islam, liberal Islam. Do you think, Jure, that this comes back, that it is possible to get back in the Balkan this, say, diverse, vibrant and colorful Islam?
You know, I belong to a religion of bürgerliche Gesellschaft, a form of liberalism. But I will mention one other country, very interesting, Kosovo, for example. The first president of Kosovo converted from Islam to Catholicism, Ibrahim Rugova. Nobody in the country rejected him as president. He was re-elected and re-elected until the death. Ibrahim Rugova was not Murad, was not apostate of Islam, because he tried to persuade Europe that Islam in Kosovo belongs to the liberal tradition. If you see this EuARe or Louis Dupe, these British singers, the most of them are from Kosovo. If you ask them religion, which religion? They sang in the church, they sang in the mosques. They belong to some form of liberal Islam, which is characteristic of Albanian people. This characteristic, it is totally different from the maybe Arab. In Arabian country, you have Christian and Muslim, but why you have so radical form? In Bosnia, we don't have radical form of Islam, a political Islam. The influence is from Saudi Arabia and from Erdogan, of course. And they try to persuade and to build Islamic Party to make more linked from university, the policy and all that. But I think majority of people, because I talk in the same form when I'm in Zagreb, in Sarajevo, or here in Münster, and ask the girl, would you decide by yourself whom want to marry or that your dad decide? 99% decide, I want to decide by myself. And that's the reason that I think our option of liberal society will win one day. Maybe not in Germany, but in Sarajevo, sure. Because the girls want to belong to the to the European tradition, and they have Bayram party. You have special word, Bayram party, to drink your paisel, to drink unbelievable lot during the party of Bayram. And that exists, the celebration of Bayram party you have in all cities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I participate, of course, on Bayram party because the friends invite me. Yeah. And that's normal. Yeah. In some sense, it's different. What Susanne Schröter explained, we could learn something from this reception.
Let her comment.
How would you judge the newly Salafi financing of Bosnian Islam? We have a project going on in Bosnia, particularly on Salafism, and we found out that a lot of money is over there and that they try to buy everybody. And it's very...
yeah, you're right. We have 5%.
It's a big mosque. It's a big mosque, totally financed from Saudi Arabia, right?
Big bibliotheques too, and all that. But I think among Bosnian Muslims, you have between 5 or 10% only the people who have sympathy or belong to Salafi or Wahhabi movement. Majority of people have sympathy with European countries, with European tradition, and all my friends and Hans-Peter know, a lot of them, they participated on our course in Dubrovnik on philosophy of religion. Maybe we should have one topic in the next year, Islam. We would invite you both to Dubrovnik to discuss this, because in Dubrovnik we have the mosque. We have in Dubrovnik almost 10% of Muslims, but nobody see them, nobody recognize them, because they are as other people. They go. The Imam from Dubrovnik say you are covered for the wife, the woman. That women are covered if they have bikini on. And I think that's a different interpretation of the Quran. Yeah, and what does mean the woman has to be covered? And I agree with Imam von Dubrovnik if she has a bikini, that she's covered.
But I have one question. You told there are only 5 to 10%, but
Wahhabi or Salafi, in Bosnia, no more. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But they are radical. They have money. They try to convert other to they prefer the true Islam. They interpret them as representative of true Islam and all that, and that the war was reason that the Muslim people were killed during the war because they were not religious and all that. That this movie from this famous filmmaker from Sarajevo and all. But I think the influence of Salafi and the Wahhabi movement and Erdogan lost the election in Istanbul. He will lose in Turkey and maybe not in Germany. Among German people here, among Turkish people in Germany, but the majority of Turkey. I have a lot of friends at university in the Turkey who are secular Turks. If you go to Beşiktaş, Maltepe University, and everybody of these academic people is against Erdogan.
We should now open the discussion, which was a very good discussion now, in my opinion, now also to the audience. So it's the possibility to ask questions. I have to look, where is the microphone? Here you have to go in the back. There's one in the back. In the back left, yeah.
Thank you for these excellent presentations. My name is Benno van den Toren, Intercultural Theology in Groningen. I do have a question that relates to things of this debate that makes me slightly uncomfortable, and that is the way fundamentalism has been framed in, I think, all three of the presentations, where there is an opposition between liberal society and fundamentalism. And if I listened well, ideas like Islam is more important for me than anything else were framed as fundamentalism. Or I try to convert other people is framed as fundamentalism. And I'm really wondering whether those sort of attitudes should exclude someone from living in a, say, democratic society. Many Christians, maybe part of my discomfort is that as a Christian, I would fit in those categories when I think about Christianity. You know, I would desire for other people to become Christians. For me, Christ is more important than democracy. It is. And yet, I fully enjoy living in a democracy. I would support it. So, my question is, would there be openings for a form of Islam that allows Muslims to proclaim Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, whom all should follow, which I would not agree with, which would allow them their desire to convert others because he is the prophet according to them, and yet embrace that in a free society other people should also have that right? Or is that impossible? Quite recently, actually, in July, there was a big Indonesian organization, I think it's called Nahdlatul Ulama, that together with the World Evangelical Alliance signed an agreement that they would allow each other the right to convert, because they said that's part of our religious commitment. And yet we also want to abstain from political support to promote that. As a Christian, I can see that as a possibility because, you know, I believe that God only wants people to love him freely. There seems to be this huge Muslim organization in Indonesia that says that's also possible for Islam. Would you agree to that? And I would actually hope that that is possible, because otherwise you seem to set people up for a choice which is very, I would feel, very hard for many Muslims. Namely, either you say that there is no reason to really proclaim, all religions are equally valuable, or you don't fit in a liberal society, which to me sounds to be an opposition which is not really helpful, and at least in Christianity, not possible. Thank you.
Do you want to answer, Professor Schröter? Yes. Yes, please.
I'll give you an example why this can be a problem, fundamentalism. You mentioned the idea that Muhammad is a model for everybody, that he is the best of all Muslims, everybody should follow him. And then the argument goes further, nobody has the right to criticize him. We had in Europe, we had several violent occasions when which were triggered by Muhammad cartoons. The first was in Denmark, the second was in France, and the last one was again in France, where the teacher Samuel Paty was murdered by a young Islamist. He was murdered because in school, in his lesson, he was discussing republican values and referred to the Muhammad cartoons. And then Muslim parents blamed him as an enemy of Islam. They took the whole issue into the internet, and this was in Paris, and 100 kilometers away from Paris, a young Chechenian-born Muslim, 18 years old, went with a train to Paris, and he found out who the teacher was, and then he beheaded him. So this is not a single example, but this is one of the results of fundamentalism. I do not mean that every fundamentalist is violent, but we have a violent layer which is very close to fundamentalism, and which is justified by fundamentalism. So I think that, and this is only one example. Like, I could mention more examples from school, from public schools, where fundamentalism and fundamentalist ideas cause a lot of conflicts, cause blaming of non-Muslim pupils of liberal and secular Muslim pupils, and things like that. So yes, I agree with you that it must be possible that somebody is truly religious and says, yes, at the end, religion is the most important for me. But if it comes to norms and values in society, I would always demand that secular norms, the norms of the state, related to human rights, to individual rights of people, should be recognized first, and then comes the religion.
I think it's important to make this different between if somebody says, or if a Muslim say, I am Muslim and this is for me the only right way to go to heaven, or it's the only right religion for me, this is no problem. If somebody wants to say this or believe on it, or if Christianity say for me is the only way to go to heaven is through Jesus, or it's okay. But if somebody says, if I am a Muslim and say, Hans-Peter, I have to fight against you, I have to change you, if you don't come a Muslim, so you are my enemy, and I must change you, otherwise you don't have a right to exist, or you are a human second class, and I'm better than you. This is fundamentalism. This is the problem. Rejection, pluralism. And this is the point. Not the point that Muslims are not allowed to say Muhammad is the only prophet and so on. But if they want to change the whole society and look at the society as society second class, or as schlechte, böse society, ja. Böse Gesellschaft. Also, yeah.
Tired society.
Yeah.
Jure,
I wanted only one sentence to you. If you compare democracy and Jesus, that's very dangerous for us, bürgerliche Gesellschaft. Say that Jesus is more important as democracy. Democracy is conditio sine qua non, that you can believe to Jesus and all other religions. You can write the book like Jasper's maßgebenden Menschen, and give argument why you not list Muhammad in the maßgebenden Menschen, people of moral measure. But you can't put the democracy at the same level as religion. Democracy is over religion. Civic society, bürgerliche Gesellschaft is conditio sine qua non that you can privately and in your community practice your religion.
So the next question is here in front. You have to move around. And then in the front here is Dr. Zemrich, who actually lived in Indonesia.
Yes, thank you. Yes, for some years. Eckhard Zemrich, Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. Thank you very much for all the contributions and this lively discussion. My question it draws on Professor Zovko's deliberations on abstraction and institutions, or so to speak, power, but it's actually directed towards all three of you. I wonder whether we perhaps have been trapped in an abstraction of the secular state ourselves. If we think it is an acceptable idea as such for all mankind, whereas it has its roots in secularized Christian values. I think it's no wonder that people are in dissent with that, if they have different backgrounds. And states, but following up from that, I mean, states have always, state policy has always shaped religions. Indonesia is a good example for that, because the state philosophy of Pancasila has shaped so heavily in the Republic of Indonesia the religions which wanted to be recognized as official religions. So they changed, in fact, to quite an extent. So my question would be, if that is true, and if that is also a right of the state, perhaps, to influence what religion can do and is not allowed to do in the country, to say it a bit polemically, would you ask for more courage or responsibility on behalf of the German state, for instance, to defend secularized Christian values? A possible example could be the controversy with DITIB over the last few years, where actually there was a bit of a sharpening of the handling by the state. But to put it into the extreme, how then to escape the accusation that the state or our society tries to Christianize Islam?
May you answer?
You can start. I have to think about it.
I could start, and maybe you could continue. Yeah. I wouldn't Christianize Islam because I would develop people for bürgerliche Gesellschaft, because in bürgerliche Gesellschaft you can practice different form of religion, but you have the law of bürgerliche Gesellschaft, of civil society.
Okay.
What is not the case with Islamic tradition, what is not the case with the parallel polis of Islamic communities in Germany. Why is for me important the states? If you make interviews with the refugees, why should they come to Germany? Because you have excellent standard. You have health care, the best in the world. I go now for one operation to Germany because I can't do in Croatia. I have to pay, in difference to German people who don't pay that in German clinics. And I have studied in this country. That's my second fatherland, my Heimat.
We talk now not about Germany.
Because I belong to this tradition. And That's the reason that I have sympathy with these states. And in that sense, I can't understand the people who are against this welfare society, soziale Staat model in Hegelian sense, because the state has responsibility for the social case. I can't understand without problem Islamic fundamentalism in Israel, in Palestine, because they have not rights. But the Muslims in Germany, they have rights, all rights, as part of bürgerliche Gesellschaft. And that's the reason that I have respect for this form of the states. You can realize all your rights in the states. What John Rawls saw different between Germany and Kazakhstan in Hegelian sound. In Kazakhstan, you have good Islamic society, but all people are not equal. Only the Muslim people are equal in the society. That's a big difference. It's, in some sense, it's the problem for Indonesia.
Mouhanad.
I agree. The state needs more influence on religion, but not to shape religions, because we are in secular states, but to define the values of democracy and human rights. This is why we need more influence from state, but this can be dangerous. This is why I say only to defend democracy and values and human rights, because today in Afghanistan, if you ask me the same question, I will say, no, the state, the Taliban should not influence the religion. But here in Germany or in democratic societies, I think we need more influence to defend the democracy values and human rights.
Professor Schröter?
From my side as well. What happens if the state does not defend democracy and human rights against Islam? You can see this, for example, in France. The scholar for Islamic studies, Bernard Royer, he found out in his recent researches that 150 territories in France are already in the hands of radical Islamists. That means that kids in these areas don't go to school any longer. They only go to Islamic schools. Women are banned from the public. Representatives of the state are seen as enemies. Police does not go into these quarters anymore. And after the murder of Samuel Paty, President Macron announced that he declares war. So the French always declare war. That is a particular rhetoric. We won't have it in Germany, but he declared war on radical Islam, and not only on Salafism, but also on political Islam as such. And I think he is right, because political Islam, as Mouhanad Khorchide already showed in his talk, is not only affecting Muslim societies, but the aims are society as such. Political Islam's aim is to Islamize society and change society according to particular Islamic laws. And this starts from segregated communities or parallel societies, name it as you want. But the results are catastrophic. It is a catastrophe for democracy, it's a catastrophe for liberal societies. And so I think that the state has not only the right, but has the duty to defend open societies. And that has nothing to do with the Christianization of societies. The opposite is true. What politicians do when they work together with the Milli Görüş, the DTIP, or the Muslim Brotherhood, is to declare these organizations as Islamic churches, which they are not. So Christianization is not the topic. The topic is the defense of liberal society.
You know, inter-Islamic, we are discussing about the question, does Islamic theology or Islam modernize itself from itself? A theologian will sit together and say, oh, we have to reflect this and that the other way, or they need some pressure from outside. And I think, if it's true, I don't know, you know it better than me, I think the history of Christianity in the 17th, 18th century told us Christianity didn't come to enlightenment from itself, the theologian. It needs pressure from outside. Maybe the Islam also.
As I had encouraged the online participants also to ask questions, I have now one, and therefore I would like to read this statement, even if we are coming now close to the end. And I'm sorry to you in the back that I prefer now the online statement. It's from Maya Kutcha, and she writes, "Thank you all for your contributions. It was very interesting." So the compliment I share. My questions are more general, so all of you can reply if you want to. I think the world is currently going through one of the crises of liberalism because of the pandemic, especially in the context of human rights. But regarding Europe, do you think a kind of crisis is possible regarding migrations from 2015 in the sense of the crisis of liberal society and or democratic political order in Europe? And who is or who can be eventually responsible for this kind of crisis? EU or her member states? And the last one, how should European Union behave after granting asylum? Can it require from Islamism to adapt in terms of the universalization of human rights regarding, for example, education, everyday life, and so on? So I think it's a question about, say, the consequences of these migrations from Middle East, and how this challenges European liberal societies in again in a new way than with say having Muslims in societies which are living now in the third generation already, and so I'm sure you have an opinion to this.
Okay. I say one, two sentences.
Yes.
We are making the experience here in Germany that, at example, the Syrians came here from Syria 2015. They are better educated than the second and third generation of Muslims here coming. They came in the 60s. Their parents came in the 60s or 70s of the 20th century, because the migration in Germany, this is specific for Germany and I think Austria, maybe not France. The most of the migration of Islam, they came as workers in the 1670s. But the Syrians, they are better educated, so this is why they are better integrated today, and they understand the Islam. Not all, and we still don't have studies, don't have representative studies about this, but these are not only experience we are making. They are better integrated now, better learning and quickly learning German. Yeah, if we comprehension them with the other Muslims.
Yeah.
So,
Professor Schröter, you want to comment on this?
I would comment I would want to differentiate. If we look to Afghanistan right now, the recent example, we already got refugees from Afghanistan, and we will get more in the next time. So I think we have to distinguish who comes to us. And there are people who really fit with our society because they fight for democracy. They fought for the democracy in Afghanistan, for human rights, for women's rights, and they are threatened by Islamist actors, not only by the Taliban, but also by others. And they have been, even in the past, the life was not easy for them. All the attempts to develop society in a way that it will become more liberal was not easy in the last 20 years. So these women's rights, human rights activists, these people who really enrich our societies, they must be welcome, and we must offer them a safe haven here in Germany and also in the other European countries. But I am not an advocate of saying, yes, everybody should come, because in France they discovered they had already Taliban among the guys who were the so-called refugees. So I'm a strong advocate of the asylum system, of the norm that we should give shelter to the ones who are threatened by authoritarian regimes, by Islamist regimes, and but I won't take everybody and then finally discover, yes, some of these guys are Islamists as well. I won't let more Islamists into our country. But all the ones who advocate human rights, who fight for the norms and values of an open societies, they must be welcomed every time.
So thank you for these statements, and I think the contributors earn an applause by you. Perhaps you can. We are now at the end of this discussion, and I hope that you are enriched by the reflections and the information you got, and I wish you a good conference ongoing. Thank you very much to Frankfurt for joining us, and goodbye.